The human ship Ardent Horizon drifted through the vastness of space, a tiny speck among the stars. Captain Elias Ward stood at the observation window, his hands clasped behind his back, and gazed at the approaching world. The planet before him was unlike anything Earth had ever seen. Towering crystal spires shimmered beneath swirling violet clouds, and rivers of luminescent liquid traced paths across the surface. Humanity had prepared for this moment for decades, but the reality still stole his breath away. This was not a simple mission of exploration. This was a meeting with the most feared ruler in known space, Queen Zalith of the Krylith Dominion. Elias had read every report, every historical account, and every cautionary note about her. She had never smiled. She had never yielded. She had ruled through intelligence, fear, and an almost alien kind of detachment. To most, she was a legend of terror, an unapproachable monarch whose decisions had shaped the course of entire star systems. And now Elias, a mere human, would step into her presence. The Ardent Horizon docked smoothly on the colossal platform orbiting the planet. The chamber inside the alien station was enormous, a seamless expanse of metal and light, with corridors that twisted like the veins of some giant living organism. Elias's team followed closely, each member aware of the weight of history they carried. Diplomats, scientists, and observers from Earth had traveled far, but only Elias had been chosen to deliver the personal gesture, the gift that might bridge the vast divide between two civilizations. As they entered the main hall, Elias's heart beat faster. Before him stood the Queen. She was magnificent, not in a human sense, but in a way that demanded attention and respect. Her form was tall, almost double the height of a human, with limbs that moved with calculated grace. Her skin glimmered faintly, reflecting the light of the chamber like the surface of a dark crystal. Her 6 eyes, arranged symmetrically on her elongated face, were luminous and piercing, scanning the room with a cold precision. No one in the hall dared meet her gaze directly. It was said that those who did often felt their deepest fears and regrets laid bare. Elias stepped forward. The other representatives bowed subtly, maintaining their distance, but he remained upright. He had been trained in diplomacy, yet he knew this was no ordinary negotiation. He was not here to debate trade agreements or military alliances. He was here to reach across a gulf of understanding. Armed with a gift and nothing else, he presented it carefully. The object in his hands was small, almost insignificant compared to the grandeur surrounding them. It was a music box, hand-carved from a warm reddish wood with tiny constellations etched delicately onto its surface. Its design was simple, almost rustic, a reflection of a planet filled with oceans, forests, and children who laughed in the sunlight. Elias wound it gently, and a soft, tinkling melody began to play. The Queen's eyes shifted toward the sound. A silence unlike anything he had expected fell over the hall. Not a whisper, not a shuffle of feet, just stillness. The melody floated between them, a fragile thing against the weight of centuries and empires. Guards tensed, leaning forward as if anticipating a threat, but there was none. Elias could see the smallest changes in her expression, minute tremors of her mandibles, a flicker in her eyes. For the first time, she was not commanding, not judging, not calculating. She was listening. Other delegates murmured behind their hands, confused by the human's audacity. Why would someone offer a mere trinket to the most powerful being in the galaxy? What power could it hold? Elias ignored them. He had not traveled light years to impress with technology or weaponry. He had traveled for something far more profound, the chance to show that humans could offer empathy and beauty without expectation. Minutes passed. The Queen did not move. She did not speak. She simply stood frozen, as the melody wound down to a soft hum. When the music finally stopped, the room seemed to exhale collectively. The Queen raised one clawed hand, slow and deliberate, dismissing the attendants and guards. It was a gesture of authority, yet not in the usual terrifying way. It carried curiosity. Elias's pulse raced. He had crossed a line that no human had ever dared approach. By presenting something beautiful, something utterly useless in terms of power or negotiation, he had offered her a glimpse of a different kind of strength, the quiet resilience of humanity. The Queen's silence was not anger. It was thought. It was reflection. After what felt like hours, she spoke, her voice low and resonant, echoing in the hall. It was not directed at anyone else but him. "Why this?" she asked. Elias met her gaze, steady and unflinching. "Because sometimes people need to be reminded that they are more than their crowns," he said. "More than the weight of their decisions or the fear of others. Sometimes even the most powerful need to hear a simple melody, to see something beautiful for no reason at all." For the first time, one of her 6 eyes softened. A subtle twitch of her mandibles suggested curiosity, perhaps even awe. The queen stepped closer, moving with a grace that belied her massive frame, and leaned over the music box, watching the wood glint under the lights. Her attendants stayed back, unsure of what to do. To them this was a human's folly, yet no one dared intervene. Elias remained still. He had no strategy beyond the honesty of his gesture. He had no plan beyond offering the simplest form of human kindness. And yet in that silence something unprecedented began to shift. The queen's eyes followed the constellations carved into the music box, and for a fleeting moment, they seemed to reflect a memory of a sky she had once known. A sky before wars, before crowns, before the endless calculations of power. The chamber felt different now, less like a court of judgment and more like a space of shared understanding. Other delegates leaned in, curious and cautious. They had come to witness history, yet history was unfolding not through treaties or speeches, but through a single human act of thoughtfulness. Elias did not break the moment. He allowed the queen to experience it fully, knowing that the impact of a gift like this could not be measured in hours or even days. It would ripple outward, subtle and profound, changing how she saw the world, and perhaps how the galaxy would see humanity. When the queen finally moved, it was almost imperceptible. She touched the edge of the music box with a clawed finger, then withdrew it as if the sensation alone was overwhelming. Her eyes lingered on him, and Elias felt the weight of her attention, not the weight of command, but the weight of recognition. She had seen him. She had seen humanity, and in that acknowledgement a bridge had formed where none had existed before. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur. Delegates presented technologies, exchanged diplomatic statements, and discussed interstellar trade. But Elias and the queen remained in their quiet orbit, each aware of the moment that had passed between them. She no longer spoke to him in commands or warnings. She asked questions, simple questions about Earth, about the forests and oceans he had described, about the people who laughed under the sun. And he answered with patience and sincerity, offering pieces of a world that she had never known. By the time the delegation returned to the ardent horizon, Elias understood that something fundamental had changed. He had not defeated the queen with weapons. He had not outwitted her with cunning. He had done something far more human. He had offered beauty without expectation, and it had altered the course of their encounter. As the ship left the orbit of the alien world, Elias stood again at the observation window. The planet glowed beneath the swirling clouds, majestic and intimidating, yet not insurmountable. He realized that this was only the beginning. The queen's frozen moment, the silence that had followed, and the spark of recognition he had ignited would resonate far beyond this single meeting. And somewhere deep in the violet skies of that distant world, the alien queen remembered what it meant to feel. The morning on the Krylith Dominion's planet was unlike anything Elias had experienced. From the observation deck of the ardent horizon, he watched the violet clouds swirl above the jagged crystal spires, reflecting the first light of the system's twin suns. Even after the events of the previous day, the world felt alive in a way he couldn't describe. Everything seemed sharper, more vibrant, as though the planet itself had taken notice of him. The alien station's communication system buzzed, signaling the arrival of a request. Elias and his team gathered in the central chamber, unsure of what to expect. The Krylith attendants moved like shadows across the polished floor, whispering in a language no human could comprehend. Yet every motion conveyed urgency. A single enormous doorway slid open, and the queen herself appeared. Unlike yesterday, there was no grand display of authority, no thrumming of the chamber's defensive systems, no intimidating gestures. She walked with a purpose, her massive form moving like liquid metal over the reflective surface. Elias felt his chest tighten. He had been trained for negotiations, for diplomacy, for moments like this, yet the simplicity of her approach unsettled him. She stopped a few meters away and regarded him with her 6 glowing eyes, each one shimmering with curiosity. The attendants fell back, giving her space. while the rest of the human delegation watched from behind the safety barrier. "Come," she said, her voice calm yet commanding, carrying a tone that was more question than order. Elias stepped forward cautiously. He realized even now that he was stepping into a space that no human had ever fully understood. The Queen had asked for him specifically, ignoring the rest of the delegation. That choice alone was extraordinary. He followed her as she led him through corridors that seemed alive, pulsing with energy, and eventually arrived at a chamber unlike any he had seen before. The walls were translucent, revealing the violet clouds outside. Floating platforms moved silently across the room, carrying objects that Elias could not identify. Strange symbols glowed faintly along the walls, and the air hummed with energy, a vibration that resonated deep within his chest. At the center of the room was a pedestal, carved from the same crystal as the station itself, and upon it rested another object, a gift, though this one was clearly intended for display. The Queen gestured toward the pedestal. "You gave me yesterday a gift of beauty and simplicity. I have never received such a thing. I wish to understand it, and perhaps to share something in return." Elias stepped closer, examining the object. It was a small spherical device about the size of a human fist. Its surface was smooth, metallic, but it pulsed faintly with a soft internal light. "What is it?" he asked. She tilted her head, a motion both graceful and alien. "It is a memory orb. It contains experiences of my people, images, sounds, emotions. It is offered not as a weapon, not as a tool, but as understanding. I wish you to see the Krylith world through our eyes as I saw your gift yesterday." Elias nodded, his heart pounding. The Queen's gesture mirrored his own. She was offering him insight, sharing herself in a way no human had ever been shared with. Carefully, he reached out and touched the orb. The moment his fingers made contact, his mind was flooded with sensations. Colors he had never seen, shapes that defied earthly geometry, sounds that resonated like music and thought at once. But more than the sensory input, he felt the history of the Krylith people, their triumphs, their struggles, their losses. He felt the weight of the Dominion, the burden of endless wars, and the loneliness of a ruler who had carried the hopes and fears of countless worlds. He staggered back, overwhelmed, but the Queen remained calm, her eyes watching him intently. "Do you understand?" she asked. Elias took a deep breath, trying to process what he had experienced. I think I do," he said finally. "I can feel the history of your people. I can feel the decisions you've had to make. And I see why it's so important to you, why it shapes everything you are." The Queen's eyes softened slightly, an expression that humans might recognize as acknowledgement, maybe even approval. Most who receive the orb are frightened or dismissive. Few take the time to feel. You did not recoil. You listened. Perhaps it is because of your gift yesterday. You understand that not all power is force. Elias smiled faintly. Sometimes the smallest things matter the most. For a long while they stood together in silence, the orb resting between them. Elias realized that this was more than a lesson in diplomacy. It was a bridge between species. The Krylith Queen, feared by countless civilizations, had allowed herself to be vulnerable, and he had allowed himself to truly see her. In that vulnerability, a strange trust began to form. Later, the Queen led him to a balcony that overlooked the sprawling city below. Towers of crystal caught the light of the suns, refracting it into countless colors. Rivers of glowing liquid wound through the landscape like veins, and massive ships floated effortlessly through the skies. Elias felt a rush of awe, but also a strange calm. He was seeing the Dominion not as a subject of fear, but as a place of beauty and purpose. "They have built wonders," he said softly. "It is incredible, but it must weigh heavily on you leading them all." The Queen nodded. "It is a burden. Many see only what we possess, not what it costs us to hold it. And yet some moments remind me why we endure. Your gift yesterday, it was one of those moments. I have spent centuries untouched by kindness, yet you offered it freely, without expectation. It changed something." Elias glanced at her, noticing a subtle shift in her demeanor. For the first time, she seemed less like a distant, untouchable ruler, and more like a being capable of thought and reflection, even emotion. He realized that this was the beginning of a rare connection, one that could alter the course of human and Krylith relations forever. "Do you ever wonder," he asked, "what it would be like to live without the crown? To just be?" The Queen paused, her eyes fixed on the horizon. I do, every day. Yet to abdicate would mean chaos for my people. I am bound by duty, but sometimes I long for the simplicity of your world, of laughter and music that exists not for strategy, not for gain, but for joy. Elias smiled. He had heard these words in fragments before, in stories of fallen monarchs and rulers who had quietly yearned for freedom, but to hear them directly from the alien queen was unprecedented. I think every species, every civilization needs moments like that. Moments where they remember that life is not only about power or survival. She turned to him, her eyes piercing yet thoughtful. Perhaps that is why you are different. Other humans negotiate, bargain, threaten, and persuade. You offer something intangible, and yet it carries power beyond any weapon or fleet. Your gift was not a tool. It was a statement about what humanity values. Elias felt a warmth spread through him. He had not realized that a simple music box could carry such meaning, nor that the act of offering something freely could be recognized across species. Then maybe humanity has more to teach the galaxy than we thought, he said. Not through war or technology, but through understanding. The queen studied him for a long moment, then spoke in a tone that carried quiet authority. Perhaps. There is merit in this perspective. There is merit in seeing power not only as domination, but as responsibility, and sometimes as beauty. You have reminded me of that, human. Later, as he returned to the ship, Elias reflected on the morning's events. The Dominion had always been a place of fear and awe, a civilization shaped by discipline and power. Yet now he had glimpsed a new layer of reality, a culture capable of artistry, memory, and deep emotion. The queen, the most feared ruler in known space, had allowed herself to remember something she had long buried. And he, a human, had played a role in that transformation. As the ardent horizon prepared to leave orbit, he looked back at the alien city, glowing under the twin suns. The queen had retreated to her chambers, carrying the memory of his gift with her and perhaps carrying a spark of something that had been missing for centuries, the reminder that even the strongest beings needed to feel, to experience beauty and to connect. Elias knew that this was only the beginning. The bond formed in those quiet hours would ripple across the galaxy, challenging assumptions about power, diplomacy, and the uniqueness of humanity. And somewhere, deep in the heart of the Krylith Dominion, the alien queen thought of a simple melody, of constellations carved in wood, and of the human who had reminded her that even the most formidable rulers could be touched by kindness. For Elias, the realization was profound. In a universe defined by technology, conquest and fear, the smallest gestures, gifts offered freely, music shared across worlds, empathy extended without expectation, could reshape history. And in that understanding he felt a sense of purpose, knowing that humans had a role greater than survival, greater than power, a role in reminding the galaxy that feeling, beauty, and understanding mattered as much as victory and control. The days that followed the first encounter felt surreal for Elias. The alien world had not changed, but the way he experienced it had. The Krylith Dominion, a civilization once intimidating and unknowable, seemed to hum with new possibilities. Even the Queen's actions suggested a subtle shift in her perception of humans. She no longer approached him with distant authority or rigid calculation. Instead, she interacted with a quiet curiosity that seemed almost fragile. Elias found himself invited to a series of informal meetings in the Queen's private chambers. Each session was unlike anything the human delegation had expected. There were no rigid protocols, no intimidating displays of power. The Queen seemed genuinely interested in understanding humanity, its culture, emotions, and ways of life. For a species accustomed to domination, conquest, and cold efficiency, this willingness to explore the unknown without expectation was extraordinary. On the third day, the Queen brought him to a vast observatory high above the city. The floor was transparent, allowing a full view of the alien metropolis below, lit by the twin suns that hung in the sky. Enormous spires of crystal and steel reflected the light, and rivers of glowing liquid wound their way through the city like veins of energy. Airships of unimaginable design floated silently, while massive structures hovered above the ground, defying gravity in ways Elias could barely comprehend. "This is my city," the Queen said, her voice softer than usual. "Yet it is not only mine. It belongs to those who dwell within it, and to those who came before. Every crystal, every river, every structure has a history, and every history carries responsibility. Elias nodded, taking in the view. It's incredible. The scale, the beauty. It must be overwhelming to manage it all. The Queen's 6 eyes followed him carefully. Overwhelming is not the word. Every day I must balance ambition with caution, innovation with preservation. A single mistake could disrupt countless lives. Leadership is not power. It is vigilance, patience, and sacrifice. It is solitude more than command. Elias considered this, realizing the depth of her burden. On Earth, leaders faced crises, but nothing compared to the weight carried by a ruler of a civilization spanning multiple planets. And yet there was something human in her words, an echo of the struggles he had seen in his own world. He thought of the small music box he had offered, and how something so simple could touch even the most powerful beings. I've been thinking, he said, about what it means to lead, and about how humans value things differently. On Earth, we make mistakes constantly. We fail, we stumble, we argue, but we also forgive and we learn. Sometimes our greatest strength comes not from control, but from resilience. The Queen tilted her head, a gesture of curiosity. Resilience, an intriguing concept. I see much in humans, Captain, that is foreign and yet admirable. Your species adapts, grows, and survives not always through power, but through will, ingenuity, and persistence. It is a quality I have rarely encountered. As they spoke, an alarm sounded throughout the station, though it was not urgent. A fleet of Krylith ships, sleek and massive, approached from the edge of the system. Elias and the Queen moved to a viewing platform, observing the formation. He had expected this moment to be tense, maybe even threatening, but there was no fear in her expression. Only precision, calculation, and confidence. These are scouts, she explained. They monitor our borders, ensure no threats approach undetected. They also remind us of the galaxy's vastness and the dangers it contains. Elias watched as the ships moved in perfect synchrony, a display of engineering and discipline that left him awestruck. It's impressive, he admitted. But I can't help thinking, what if there's more to strength than just fleets and weapons? The Queen's eyes met his, and for a moment the immensity of her gaze seemed to pierce into his very thoughts. Perhaps, she said finally. But words alone do not convince a galaxy. Action must follow. Influence must be demonstrated. And sometimes influence requires the courage to offer something unexpected. Elias realized she was speaking of his gift, the music box, the gesture of human kindness. He understood now that it had achieved more than he had imagined. It had not only touched her personally, but had shifted the way she thought about humanity. She was beginning to see humans not as weak, primitive beings, but as a species capable of subtle, profound power that came from intellect, empathy, and creativity. Over the following days, Elias worked closely with the Queen and her advisors. They discussed technology, history, and culture, and slowly barriers that had seemed insurmountable began to fade. He noticed small changes in her demeanor. She asked more questions, listened more intently, and sometimes even hesitated before issuing commands, as though considering alternatives she had never allowed herself to contemplate. One afternoon, as the twin suns cast long shadows across the observatory, the Queen spoke of a memory she had rarely shared. Before I became Queen, my world was different, she said. We were explorers, dreamers. There was music, laughter, art. But those days ended when war began. Ambition and survival demanded sacrifice. The beauty of our civilization came at the cost of our innocence. Elias felt a pang of empathy. That's hard to imagine. You've built a civilization that others fear and respect, but it cost you something precious. Humans know loss too. We understand sacrifice, grief, and the longing for what once was. She regarded him silently for a long moment. Perhaps that is why your gift affected me so deeply. It reminded me of what I had lost, of what my people had once been. And it reminded me that even in power there is room for moments of beauty. He smiled softly. Sometimes a small gesture can carry more meaning than entire fleets or empires. It's the thought, the intention that matters. The effort to reach across boundaries, even ones that seem impossible, shows strength. The Queen's gaze lingered on him, and he sensed a subtle shift in her perception. She was beginning to value qualities humans often took for granted: empathy, creativity, and resilience. These were not attributes easily measured by power or strategy, yet they held a kind of influence that could not be ignored. Days turned into a week, and Elias noticed the Queen becoming more open to discussion. She no longer treated him as an outsider, but as a participant in shaping ideas. In her chambers, they debated approaches to diplomacy, ethics, and the balance between ambition and compassion. He suggested small projects, cultural exchanges, shared knowledge, collaborative experiments that could foster mutual understanding. She listened, occasionally challenging his assumptions but always considering his perspective. One evening, as the two stood on the balcony overlooking the city, Elias spoke quietly. "Your people are incredible, but you don't have to bear the weight alone. There are others, humans, Krylith, other species, who can work together. Strength doesn't have to mean solitude." The Queen's expression was thoughtful, almost wistful. "Solitude has been my companion for centuries. It is both a shield and a chain. Your presence, your gift, they remind me that connection is possible, even for those who hold great responsibility." He nodded, understanding the depth of her struggle. "It is possible. And it starts with small steps. A gesture, a conversation, a willingness to see someone else's world. That is how bridges are built." For the first time, the Queen allowed herself a small smile. Not grand, not joyous, but a quiet acknowledgement of change. It was subtle, yet Elias recognized its significance. She was beginning to allow herself to experience human qualities, reflection, curiosity, and even hope. The following days were filled with activity. Elias helped establish collaborative research between humans and Krylith scientists, focusing on sustainable energy, environmental preservation, and communication technologies. He was amazed at the Krylith innovations, yet he also noticed how the Queen encouraged creativity over hierarchy, listening to ideas even from the youngest researchers. The influence of his gift became apparent. The Queen's leadership was shifting, subtle but significant. One evening, the Queen summoned him to a private garden within the station, a space filled with strange plants that glowed softly in the dim light. "I have been considering your words," she said. "Humanity values resilience, beauty, and empathy. Perhaps it is time for my people to embrace some of these qualities as well, not at the cost of strength, but as a complement to it." Elias smiled, feeling the weight of what they had achieved. That is all anyone can hope for. Change begins with understanding. And understanding begins with small gestures, moments that remind us of what really matters. The Queen extended her clawed hand toward him, a gesture of trust and acknowledgement. Elias hesitated only briefly before placing his human hand within hers. It was a simple act, yet the meaning was profound. A human and the most feared alien monarch forming a connection built on mutual respect and recognition. As he left the garden that night, Elias reflected on how far things had come. The Queen, once untouchable and unyielding, had begun to embrace qualities that humans valued. He realized that this was not just a personal victory, but a turning point for interstellar relations. Humanity's influence, subtle yet profound, was beginning to shape the course of the Dominion. And somewhere in the heart of the Krylith Empire, the Queen thought of the music box, the constellations carved in wood, and the human who had reminded her that even the peace of the Krylith Dominion, fragile as it was, did not last long. While Elias and the Queen had begun to build understanding and trust, the galaxy remained a place of unpredictability, danger, and ambition. Word of the human delegation's presence spread quickly among neighboring systems. Some viewed it as a threat, others as an opportunity, and a few saw it as a weakness. For centuries, the Dominion had been feared because it acted decisively, with swift and overwhelming force. Now, with its Queen showing signs of openness, whispers of vulnerability began to circulate. Elias noticed the change immediately. During one morning briefing in the Queen's chamber, a scout arrived with urgent news. A fleet from the neighboring system of Varkor had crossed the boundary of Dominion space. They were smaller than the Krylith forces, but their numbers were significant, and their intentions were unclear. The Queen, calm yet focused, studied the approaching vessels. Her 6 eyes, glowing with intensity, scanned the readings. "They are testing us," she said softly, almost to herself. "They are probing for weaknesses. They do not yet understand that strength can take many forms." Elias felt a mixture of anticipation and tension. He had read about confrontations like this in history books, and he knew the Dominion's standard response would be immediate retaliation, a demonstration of overwhelming force to discourage further intrusion. Yet he also knew that the queen had been changing, learning from the human perspective. This time might be different. She summoned her advisors and the senior fleet commanders. The room buzzed with activity, but Elias remained calm, observing carefully. He had learned that the queen valued his input now, and she turned to him. "Captain Ward, your presence has reminded me that not all threats are solved with fire. What do you suggest?" Elias considered his words. "Perhaps you can show strength in a way they don't expect. Instead of meeting aggression with aggression, meet it with ingenuity. Use strategy, not just power. Sometimes intelligence and understanding can accomplish more than weapons." The queen regarded him silently for a moment, her mandibles twitching. Then she nodded. "We will prepare. But you must understand, this approach is risky. Many will not approve. Some may see it as weakness." Together they developed a plan. Rather than attacking the Varkor fleet immediately, the Krylith sent a small delegation of communication vessels, heavily guarded but non-aggressive, to meet the invaders. Elias advised the queen on the approach, suggesting transparency and openness. If they see we are confident but not hostile, they may reconsider their actions. Humans often find negotiation more effective than intimidation, especially when the goal is understanding, not conquest. The moment of truth arrived when the Varkor fleet entered visual range. Elias stood beside the queen in the observation chamber, his heart pounding as the alien ships came into view. They were sleek, black, and intimidating, with weapons arrays that could devastate planets. Yet there was no panic in the queen's posture, only measured determination. The communication vessels departed the station, moving steadily toward the Varkor fleet. Elias watched the monitors, noting every movement. The Varkor ships hesitated as the Krylith vessels approached. They expected an aggressive strike, but none came. Instead, the Krylith transmitted a simple message, offering dialogue rather than war. Elias felt a surge of hope. "They're responding," he said quietly. "They're pausing." The queen's eyes glimmered with interest. "They are surprised. They did not expect diplomacy." Minutes stretched like hours. The tension in the room was palpable, but Elias noticed something remarkable. The queen's calm was contagious. Her presence steadied the advisors and fleet commanders, who had grown accustomed to fear-based obedience. Her willingness to explore an alternative path inspired confidence. Finally, a response came from the Varkor leader, transmitted across secure channels. "We did not anticipate your restraint. We have come to test your defenses, not to provoke unnecessary war. Perhaps there is more to your leadership than we assumed." Elias allowed himself a small smile. The human approach, combined with the queen's authority, had created a situation in which the invaders reconsidered their assumptions. Strength, he realized, was not only measured in firepower, but also in courage, wisdom, and the ability to remain composed under pressure. The queen nodded to him. "Your insight has value, Captain. Humans approach problems differently, yet with clarity. You remind me that strength and understanding can coexist." In the days that followed, the Varkor fleet withdrew, leaving the Dominion unscathed. The incident became a turning point, not only in interstellar relations but also in the Queen's own perception of humanity. She began to trust Elias's judgment more openly, seeking his advice in matters beyond diplomacy, on strategy, ethics, and even culture. Elias noticed subtle changes in the Queen's behavior. She allowed herself moments of reflection, sometimes wandering alone in the observation chambers, gazing at the stars with an intensity that suggested both thought and longing. She asked questions about Earth, about its people, and about the small joys of human life. These inquiries were not superficial. They revealed a curiosity that had been dormant for centuries, a desire to understand rather than simply to command. One afternoon, as they walked through the Queen's private garden, Elias pointed to a cluster of luminescent plants. "On Earth we have forest. We value them not just for their resources, but for their beauty. They remind us of life's fragility and its resilience. Do you have something similar here?" The Queen considered the question carefully. "We have preserved certain sanctuaries, but most of our cities prioritize efficiency and control. Beauty is secondary to survival. Yet your presence, your gift, it has shown me that beauty can be a strength, not a weakness." Elias nodded. "Sometimes the smallest things have the largest impact. A gesture, a song, a moment of kindness. It can change perspectives even across species." That evening, the Queen called Elias to her chambers. She placed a hand on the edge of the music box he had given her. now a treasured possession within her collection. "I have thought much about your gift," she said softly. It revealed something I had long forgotten, a part of myself and of my people that has been buried under centuries of duty and fear. I wish to explore this further. With you. Elias felt the weight of her words. This was more than gratitude. It was an invitation to shape the future. "I would be honored," he said. "Together we can find ways to strengthen your people while preserving what makes them truly alive." The following weeks were transformative. Elias collaborated with Krylith engineers, scientists, and cultural advisors, introducing concepts from human society that emphasized creativity, collaboration, and empathy. He suggested educational programs, artistic initiatives, and exchanges between species. The Queen observed every step, sometimes challenging him, sometimes encouraging, but always engaged. Even the Krylith military began to change subtly. Training exercises incorporated strategies based on adaptability and problem-solving rather than brute force. Officers were encouraged to consider diplomacy before escalation. The influence of human values amplified through the Queen's authority began to reshape the Dominion in ways that were unprecedented. Yet, not everyone approved. Some Krylith leaders saw Elias's influence as a threat to tradition and power. Whispers of dissent grew in the corridors, though none dared confront the Queen directly. Elias knew that change was never without resistance, and he prepared for the moment when skepticism might turn into challenge. One night, the Queen summoned him to the observation deck. She was silent, staring at the stars with an intensity that seemed almost human in its depth. "Do you fear failure?" she asked suddenly, her voice quiet but firm. Elias considered the question carefully. "Of course. Every mission, every choice carries risk, but fear cannot control us. What matters is courage, the willingness to act with integrity even when the outcome is uncertain." The Queen's eyes softened, a subtle shift that spoke volumes. "You have courage, human. Not the courage of warriors or conquerors, but the courage to offer understanding, to build rather than destroy. It is a rare quality, and one that may shape the future of this Dominion more than any weapon." Elias felt a quiet pride not in himself, but in the recognition that human qualities, compassion, creativity, resilience could influence even the most formidable beings in the galaxy. The Queen's respect was not blind admiration. It was acknowledgement of the unique value humanity brought to the universe. Days later, the Queen convened a council. She spoke openly about the Varkor incident, the importance of diplomacy, and the need for the Dominion to consider alternative approaches to strength. Some advisors resisted, but the Queen's authority, now combined with the influence of human insight, was persuasive. Decisions were made that balanced power with compassion, efficiency with consideration, and strategy with understanding. Elias watched as the Dominion began to evolve, not overnight but in small, meaningful steps. He understood that true change was gradual, often imperceptible at first, yet profound in the long term. His gift, once a simple music box, had initiated a ripple effect that now touched every corner of the Queen's realm. And as he stood beside her on the observation deck one evening, watching the twin suns set, the galaxy was vast, but for Captain Elias Ward, the next moments felt as though the universe had condensed into a single point. The Krylith Dominion faced a choice, one that could determine not only its future but the stability of neighboring systems and the perception of humanity across the stars. The Queen had called an emergency council, and the tension in the chamber was palpable. Delegates from distant worlds waited, their eyes fixed on the Queen, who sat atop her throne with her usual regal presence. Yet there was something different about her posture, something lighter, as if a seed had been planted and begun to grow. Elias stood quietly near the chamber's edge, observing the assembly. He had grown accustomed to the weight of her authority, the calm that radiated even in the face of potential conflict. Yet today there was more at stake. Reports had arrived that the Varkor system, displeased by its earlier withdrawal, was preparing a second fleet, larger, more aggressive, and intent on testing the Dominion's strength. The usual response would be immediate mobilization, a display of overwhelming force, but the Queen now weighed her options differently. She raised her hand and the chamber fell silent. Every eye focused on her 6 glowing eyes, which scanned the room with both authority and consideration. "The galaxy does not thrive on fear alone," she began. For centuries, the Dominion has relied on force to maintain stability. Yet force alone cannot inspire loyalty, understanding, or lasting peace. We must choose a path that demonstrates our strength and wisdom, our power and our capacity to understand simultaneously. Elias felt a surge of anticipation. He had seen this side of her before, the thoughtful, reflective side, but never in such a public, decisive setting. He understood that this moment would define her legacy, and perhaps humanity's place in the galaxy. One of the senior advisors, a tall, armored Krylith with eyes like molten silver, rose sharply. "Your Majesty, hesitation is dangerous. The Varkor fleet grows larger. They will interpret diplomacy as weakness. We must strike swiftly and decisively." The Queen considered the statement carefully, then shook her head. "Strength is not proven solely by destruction. We will not attack blindly. We will show power, yes, but also clarity, courage, and intelligence." Elias stepped forward, encouraged by her resolve. "Your Majesty, if I may suggest," he said, "we can combine demonstration of force with diplomacy. Humans often use transparency to create understanding. Let them see our strength, but also our willingness to reason. It can prevent unnecessary conflict while establishing respect." The Queen's eyes lingered on him. "Your gift has not only reminded me of beauty, human, but also of perspective. You speak wisely. We will act, but we will act with thought, not impulse." The council murmured, some dissenting, others intrigued. Orders were transmitted across the Dominion's fleets. A show of power would occur, but it would be strategic and controlled. The Queen personally oversaw the preparation, coordinating defenses and communication simultaneously. Elias was amazed at the precision of her command. Each vessel's movement deliberate, each strategy meticulously calculated, yet tempered by a new principle: understanding before aggression. As the Varkor fleet approached, sensors detected their formation, massive and threatening yet surprisingly disorganized. Elias realized they were expecting a predictable, aggressive response, one that would have played into their assumptions. The Dominion ships, under the Queen's careful guidance, moved in ways the invaders had not anticipated, displaying power without immediate attack, encircling key positions and demonstrating the reach and coordination of the Dominion without firing a single shot. A communication beacon from the Dominion ships transmitted a clear, firm message: "We are prepared to defend ourselves. We are strong, capable, and vigilant, yet we seek understanding first. Cease your advance or face the consequences of misjudgment." Elias felt his heart pound as the Varkor ships paused. Their commanders exchanged signals, confusion evident even through interstellar communications. They had expected fear, not composure, aggression, not strategy. The pause allowed time for reflection, and in that moment, the Dominion's power was amplified, not through destruction but through demonstration, and through the subtle strength of restraint. Then the unexpected happened. A small delegation from Varkor requested a direct dialogue with the Queen. Elias assisted in setting up the transmission, ensuring that the message from Earth was clear. Humans valued negotiation, clarity, and mutual respect. When the Queen appeared on the screen, she did not glare. She did not threaten. She commanded presence with intelligence, authority, and calm. "We recognize the potential for conflict," she said, her voice resonating with power and clarity. "But we also recognize that understanding is a greater demonstration of strength than aggression alone. The Dominion will not attack unless provoked, yet we are ready to defend every world under our care. Choose wisely." Elias watched the Varkor representatives closely. They hesitated, sensing the weight of her words, the intelligence behind her display of power, and the influence of the human philosophy he had helped articulate. Slowly, their tone shifted from defiance to inquiry. They began to discuss terms, seeking compromise and dialogue rather than confrontation. Hours passed as negotiations continued, mediated by Elias and the Queen. The outcome was historic. The Varkor fleet agreed to retreat, establishing a temporary truce and opening channels for collaboration rather than conflict. Elias felt a surge of relief and quiet triumph. What had seemed like imminent danger had been resolved not through firepower, but through strategy, understanding, and the subtle influence of humanity's perspective. The Queen turned to him later that evening, alone in the observatory. The twin suns had dipped below the horizon, leaving the city bathed in soft violet and gold light. "Captain Ward," she said quietly, "your presence, your gift, your insight, They have reshaped more than this council or this fleet. They have begun to reshape the Dominion itself. You have reminded me that leadership is not only about control, but about wisdom, reflection, and courage of a different kind. Elias felt a profound sense of accomplishment. Your Majesty, it was your willingness to see differently that made it possible. I only offered perspective. You chose how to act. She smiled faintly, a small, genuine gesture that illuminated her alien features in a way that seemed almost human. Perhaps we are both teachers and students human. Today, the galaxy has seen that the Dominion can wield power with clarity, compassion, and foresight. That is a legacy worth pursuing. Over the following weeks, the changes within the Dominion became apparent. Military protocols were revised to integrate diplomacy and strategy alongside force. Cultural programs encouraged creativity, collaboration, and cross-species understanding. Even the citizens of the Dominion began to notice subtle shifts in their leadership. Decisions were more measured, communication more transparent, and the value of non-violent solutions recognized as a mark of strength rather than weakness. Elias continued to work closely with the Queen, fostering initiatives that combined human ingenuity with Krylith resources. They established educational exchanges, cultural projects, and scientific collaborations that benefited both civilizations. His influence was not overt or dominant. It was subtle yet profound. The principles he represented, empathy, understanding, courage, and the power of small, thoughtful gestures began to permeate the Dominion. One afternoon, as Elias walked through the station's grand corridors, he observed the Queen overseeing a council meeting. She was firm, commanding, and decisive, yet there was a noticeable warmth in her demeanor. Her decisions balanced strategy with morality, ambition with empathy. He realized that the music box he had given her months ago had been a catalyst, not only for her personal reflection, but for systemic change throughout her empire. In a private moment later that day, the Queen summoned him once more. She held the music box in her hands, winding it slowly to play its delicate tune. The melody filled the chamber, soft and resonant. Her eyes, for a brief instant, softened in a way that Elias had never seen before. "Do you remember this?" she asked, her voice carrying a hint of nostalgia. "I do," he replied quietly. "It's the moment you first allowed yourself to feel something beyond duty and power." She nodded. "Yes, and that moment changed everything. It reminded me that even a ruler must experience beauty, empathy, and understanding. That is how we create lasting strength, human, not by ruling through fear, but by inspiring loyalty and respect." Elias felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Humanity had proven that even in a galaxy dominated by power, force and fear, small gestures of kindness, empathy, and understanding could ripple across worlds, influencing decisions, shaping civilizations, and creating bonds that might endure for centuries. As the stars twinkled beyond the observatory windows, he realized that the Queen had grown not only as a ruler, but as a being capable of reflection and connection. The Dominion had been transformed subtly but profoundly, and humanity had left an indelible mark. And somewhere in the depths of the alien world, the Queen remembered the first moment she had stood frozen in place, the music box in her hands, and the human who had reminded her that even the most formidable rulers could be touched, inspired, and guided by simple acts of